When Mia walked into the quiet cafe and saw Edward waiting at a corner table, she was struck by how much and how little had changed over the years. Edward was her mentor and friend, a man she'd known since she was barely out of college. Now, at 60, he had the same calming presence, though his face bore a few more lines and his hair was tinged with grey, but the warmth in his eyes was unmistakable, and she felt an old familiarity wash over her as she crossed the room. Mia, he greeted her with a soft smile, standing to give her a hug. His arms wrapped around her in a way that was both comforting and unexpected, and she felt a small flutter of something she hadn't anticipated, a surge of warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. "Edward," she replied, pulling back slightly to look at him. "It's been too long." They settled in, and as they ordered coffee, their conversation flowed naturally, picking up where they'd left off years ago. Mia shared stories of her recent work project while Edward listened intently, his gaze never wavering. She had always admired his attentiveness, the way he seemed to truly see her, and she found herself leaning into that warmth, almost forgetting the bustling world outside. "Can you believe it's been almost 10 years since we worked together?" he asked, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "I remember when you first joined our team, you were so full of energy, so eager to take on the world." Mia laughed, the sound light and genuine. "And you were always the calm, steady voice that kept me grounded. I don't think I would have survived those early years without you." They shared a smile, one that lingered a moment longer than it should have. Mia looked down, feeling her cheeks warm. She hadn't expected to feel this way, to be so aware of him, but as they continued talking, she noticed the small things, the way his hand rested near hers on the table, the occasional brush of his fingers as he reached for his cup. After an hour of reminiscing, Edward suggested they take a walk by the river, a place they'd often gone for brainstorming sessions during her early days at the company. As they strolled along the tree-lined path, their conversation shifted to deeper, more personal topics. He spoke about his life, his family, and the solitude he often felt in recent years, a loneliness he admitted he hadn't shared with anyone else. "It's strange," he said, looking out over the water. "You reach a point in life where you think you've figured everything out, but then, the quiet moments remind you of what's missing." Mia felt a pang of empathy, understanding his words in a way that went beyond friendship. "I know that feeling," she said softly. "There's a part of me that wonders if I've been so focused on my career that I missed out on something important." Edward looked at her, his expression contemplative, as if he were seeing her in a new light. "Mia," he began, his voice a low murmur, "you have a way of filling those empty spaces, of bringing warmth to the people around you." She met his gaze, her heart racing. There was a weight in his words, an unspoken connection that had always lingered between them but had never been acknowledged. And for the first time she felt the possibility of something more, something she hadn't dared to consider. They stopped at a bench, and as they sat down, Mia noticed his hand resting beside hers, close enough to touch. She hesitated, caught between the safety of friendship and the allure of something unknown, something forbidden. But before she could pull away, Edward's fingers brushed hers, a soft, tentative touch that sent a jolt through her. She glanced up at him, her heart pounding, and saw the same uncertainty mirrored in his eyes. He cleared his throat, his hand lingering near hers. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to cross any lines." Mia shook her head, her voice soft. "You didn't. She faltered, unsure of how to put her feelings into words, but the weight of his hand, the warmth of his touch, was all the reassurance she needed. They sat in silence, the air thick with unspoken emotions, the boundary between friendship and something more beginning to blur. Mia felt herself drawn to him in a way that defied logic, a quiet intensity that had always been there, waiting to be acknowledged. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the river, she realized that she didn't want to ignore it anymore. Finally, she took a breath, her fingers brushing against his in a gesture that felt both bold and vulnerable. "Edward," she began, her voice trembling, I don't know what's happening between us, but I can't deny that there's something here." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of longing and restraint. "Mia, I felt it too. For a long time, actually. But I never thought you. he trailed off, his gaze drifting to their intertwined fingers. In that moment, they both knew there was no going back. They had crossed an invisible line, one that had been drawn long ago but had never been acknowledged. And as the night settled around them, they sat side by side, sharing a quiet, intimate connection that was both thrilling and terrifying. The evening air grew colder, but neither of them moved. Mia's hand remained nestled against Edward's, their fingers intertwined in a gesture so subtle yet so charged with meaning. The world around them faded into a soft blur, leaving only the gentle warmth of their hands and the quiet tension simmering between them. Edward broke the silence first, his voice barely a whisper. "Mia, I never thought. I didn't expect this." Mia swallowed, her heart racing as she tried to find the right words. "Neither did I," she admitted, a nervous smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "But now that we're here, I can't seem to ignore it." He turned to face her, his gaze filled with an emotion she couldn't quite name, a mix of admiration and vulnerability that left her breathless. "Mia, I know this is complicated," he said softly, his fingers gently tracing the back of her hand. "But if you feel the same way, maybe we don't have to figure it all out tonight. Maybe we just see where this leads." The weight of his words settled over her, an invitation wrapped in uncertainty. She knew there were consequences, that the bond they shared was one built over years of friendship and trust. But the pull she felt toward him, the way his touch seemed to calm and ignite her all at once, was something she couldn't ignore. Without thinking, she leaned in, her forehead brushing against his, their breaths mingling in the small space between them. His hand cupped her face, his thumb gently tracing her cheek, and she felt her resolve crumbling, the last remnants of restraint slipping away. "Mia," he murmured, his voice filled with both longing and hesitation. She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, allowing herself to be vulnerable, to let go of the doubts that had been holding her back. And in that instant she felt his lips brush against hers, a soft, tentative kiss that spoke of both the depth of their connection and the caution they felt in crossing this line. Their kiss deepened, slowly at first, as though they were testing the boundaries of something fragile and precious. His hand moved to the back of her neck, drawing her closer, and she felt herself melt into him, the warmth of his embrace a balm to the ache that had been building inside her for so long. Each touch, each gentle press of his lips, felt like a confession, a silent admission of feelings they had both kept hidden for years. When they finally pulled apart, breathing heavily, Mia felt a surge of emotions she could barely contain. Guilt, desire, and a strange sense of peace washed over her in waves, and she found herself searching his eyes for reassurance, for some sign that he, too, was willing to step into this uncharted territory. Edward's gaze softened, his hand still cradling her face. "Mia," he whispered, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. "I don't know what this means or where it will lead, but I don't regret it, not a single moment." She felt a tear slip down her cheek, overwhelmed by the intensity of his words. "Neither do I," she replied softly, her voice barely audible. "I don't know what the future holds, but I don't want to lose us." They sat in silence, their hands still intertwined, the weight of their shared admission settling between them like a fragile secret. Mia rested her head on his shoulder, allowing herself to savor the quiet intimacy of the moment, the warmth of his presence filling a void she hadn't realized existed. The walk back to her apartment was filled with comfortable silence, each of them lost in thought, yet bound together by an unspoken understanding. When they reached her door, Edward hesitated, his gaze lingering on her with a mixture of longing and restraint. "Mia, are you sure?" he asked, his voice soft yet filled with concern. She took a step closer, her hand reaching for his, her gaze steady. "I've never been more sure of anything," she replied, her voice unwavering. "I want this, Edward. I want us." With a gentle smile, he leaned in, capturing her lips in a kiss that was both tender and passionate, a silent promise of what was to come. She led him inside, their hands never parting, their steps slow and measured as they navigated this newfound closeness, the boundaries between them fading with each shared glance, each gentle touch. The night unfolded in a series of quiet, intimate moments, lingering kisses, whispered confessions, and soft laughter that filled the small space with a warmth that felt both familiar and new. They moved together with a gentle rhythm, a silent understanding that needed no words. His touch was both reverent and yearning, his hands exploring the contours of her body as though memorizing every detail, and she found herself responding with a vulnerability she hadn't felt in years. As they lay together in the early hours of the morning, wrapped in each other's arms, Mia felt a sense of peace settle over her, a quiet assurance that this was where she was meant to be. She looked up at him, their gazes meeting in the dim light, and she saw a depth of emotion in his eyes that left her breathless. "Edward," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of her emotions. "I don't know what tomorrow holds, but thank you for this for us." He smiled, his hand gently brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "Mia, I've waited a long time for this, for you, and whatever happens, I'll always be here, always be here, always." They drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, their bodies entwined, the promise of a new beginning hanging in the air like a fragile hope. And as the first light of dawn crept through the window, Mia knew that, though their journey was just beginning, she had found something beautiful, something rare, a love that transcended time, that defied convention, and that filled her heart in ways she had never imagined. As the soft morning light filtered through the curtains, Mia stirred, her senses awakening to the warmth of Edward's arms wrapped around her. She felt the steady rhythm of his breathing, the gentle rise and fall of his chest beneath her hand. For a fleeting moment she allowed herself to bask in the quiet intimacy of the morning, the sense of belonging that filled her as she lay beside him. Edward woke slowly, his hand tightening around her as he blinked away the remnants of sleep. When he looked down at her, a smile softened his face, his eyes filled with a tenderness that made her heart ache with gratitude and joy. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice still husky from sleep. "Good morning," she replied, her fingers tracing lazy circles on his chest. "I didn't expect to feel this. At peace." He chuckled softly, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Neither did I, it feels surreal, doesn't it?" She nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle over her. She knew the world outside would question their bond, that the boundaries they'd crossed would be met with judgment. Yet in this moment none of that seemed to matter. All she felt was the quiet certainty that this was where she belonged, that Edward was the missing piece she hadn't known she was searching for. They lay in silence, savoring the quiet connection that filled the room, the sense of unity that had bloomed between them. Mia's hand drifted to his, their fingers intertwining in a gesture so simple yet filled with meaning. The night before had been everything she hadn't known she needed, gentle, raw, filled with unspoken promises that bound them in ways she hadn't expected. But as the minutes passed, reality began to creep in. Mia felt the familiar pang of uncertainty, the knowledge that their newfound closeness would not be easily accepted, that the road ahead would be anything but simple. Sensing her shift in mood, Edward tilted her chin up to meet his gaze, his expression calm yet filled with understanding. "Mia, I know this won't be easy," he said softly, his fingers brushing over her cheek. "But I'm here. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." She felt a tear slip down her cheek, a mixture of gratitude and fear welling within her. "I don't want to lose this," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't want to lose you." "You won't," he assured her, his gaze steady. "This is as real as it gets, and whatever challenges come our way, I'll be by your side." They held each other for a while longer, the warmth of their embrace a silent promise that they would face whatever came their way. But as the day wore on, the weight of their connection began to settle over them, the knowledge that they couldn't remain in this bubble forever. They eventually rose, sharing a quiet breakfast, their conversation light yet filled with the unspoken understanding that lingered between them. Mia felt the familiar warmth of his gaze, the comfort of his presence, and she knew that, no matter the cost, she would cherish this connection, this love that had taken root in the most unexpected of places. When it was time to part, Edward held her close, his hand lingering on hers, his gaze filled with a mixture of hope and longing. "Mia, whatever happens, remember this," he said softly, his voice steady. "You are loved deeply and completely, and nothing can change that." She nodded, her heart swelling with emotion, the depth of his words settling over her. "Thank you, Edward," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "for everything." They shared a final kiss, a gentle, lingering touch that spoke of all the emotions they couldn't put into words, and as she watched him walk away, a quiet resolve filled her. She would hold on to this love, this connection, no matter the challenges they faced. In the weeks that followed, they kept their bond hidden, sharing stolen moments and whispered confessions, finding solace in each other's presence. Each touch, each glance, felt like a lifeline, a reminder of the love they had found, the connection that defied reason yet felt undeniable. But with each passing day, the weight of their secret grew heavier, the boundaries between them blurred yet held in place by the reality of their lives. Mia found herself torn between the depth of her feelings and the fear of the consequences, the knowledge that the world would not understand their love, that they would be judged for the bond they shared. One evening, as they sat together in the quiet of his apartment, Edward reached for her hand, his expression contemplative. "Mia, I know this isn't easy," he began, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. "But I want you to know that whatever happens, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." She looked at him, her heart filled with both gratitude and fear. "I know," she replied softly, her voice trembling. "But sometimes I wonder if this is something we can keep hidden forever." He nodded, his gaze filled with understanding. "I feel the same. But no matter what, I don't regret a single moment with you, and I'll be here for as long as you want me to be." They sat in silence, their hands entwined, the weight of their emotions hanging between them like a fragile truth. Mia knew that their journey was far from over, that the challenges ahead would test their bond, but she felt a quiet certainty, a sense of peace that came from knowing she was loved deeply and completely. As the night wore on, they held each other close, their connection a silent promise that they would face the future together, no matter what it held. And though the road ahead was uncertain, Mia knew that, in Edward, she had found a love that was worth fighting for, a connection that would remain etched in her heart, a bond that would endure through the quiet moments and the storms alike. They drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, their bodies entwined, the warmth of their love a shield against the uncertainties of the world. And as the first light of dawn crept through the window, Mia felt a sense of peace settle over her, a quiet assurance that, though the journey was just beginning, they would face it together, bound by a love that transcended time and space, a connection that would remain forever unbroken.